Hey, Matt from Hidden Machine here. Today I want to talk about the live-action concept trailer for Alan Wake 2 that can be found in Quantum Break. Now, if you've never played the game before, or if you just missed it, the opening area of Quantum Break features this.
It's not a lake. It's an ocean.
He's been gone for 5 years.
Dark matter and dark energy constitute over 95% of our universe. We're just a speck of light floating in an endless ocean of darkness. Every story finds its writer. Wake has a bloody knife in the light of the flashlight. He smiles a wicked smile as he lies in the pool, blood on his face, eyes staring. All of us have two faces, the one we wear for all to see, and the face that lies beneath in the dark.
We're going to break down this video and compare and contrast it with what we currently know about Alan Wake 2. This video was first teased back in December of 2015, where it was described as a live-action Easter egg, with Sam Lake taking on the role of FBI agent Alex Casey, a name that would be familiar to anyone who played Alan Wake. 2 years prior, Sam Lake put out a message to Remedy fans, letting them know that Alan Wake 2 was on hold indefinitely, but that he wanted to return to the project when the time was right. It's really interesting to me that Remedy was able to maintain interest in and excitement for Alan Wake 2 over the course of 13 years, and for a long time, this live-action concept trailer video was the closest thing a lot of us fans had to a proper sequel to the first game. In a 2016 interview with VentureBeat, Sam Lake said that the idea was to create a live-action trailer that would illustrate some of the ideas they would like to explore if they were given the opportunity to create Alan Wake 2. He also mentions the Alan Wake 2 prototype video that was released in April of 2015. He says that both of these videos felt safe to release because Remedy's actual ideas and concepts for the game had evolved so much that neither of the videos really revealed anything. However, now that we've gotten a proper preview of Alan Wake 2, I think it'll be fun to revisit this Easter egg and see if it actually did wind up revealing anything. The video opens with a shot of water, presumably the waters of Cauldron Lake. Alan Wake then states, "It's not a lake, it's an ocean," which has come to be a phrase that gains more and more significance the more we learn about Remedy's connected universe. The camera then pans down beneath the water, and we're transported to a forest, where we see someone who looks like Alan waking up in that forest, and another voice comes in to say he's been gone for 5 years. And at the time of making that video, it had been 5 years since Alan entered the dark place and disappeared from reality. To me, that sounds like the voice of James McCaffrey, and he was the voice actor for Max Payne, Thomas Zane, Zachariah Trench, and Alex Casey. I don't know for sure if it's him because I don't see him listed in the credits, but it may just be an uncredited cameo. Regardless, the tone of that voice and the music that plays in this scene definitely evoke memories of Max Payne, who we know was the inspiration for Alex Casey. Sam Lake acknowledges this in that VentureBeat article I mentioned earlier. He says, if you go back to Alan Wake, you can find quite a few winks and nods toward Max Payne. It's not spelled out as Max Payne because we don't own Max anymore, but we have a writer who's written this hard-boiled crime story about a tough cop character that has all kinds of familiar details. In the first Max Payne game, Max's face was modeled after Sam Lake, and for a long time, myself and a lot of other Remedy fans speculated over whether or not Alex Casey would ever be portrayed by James McCaffrey and Sam Lake, joining forces again to, create this echo of Max Payne. Now, this concept was teased in this teaser trailer video, but we now know for sure that it's happening in Alan Wake 2, and I'm pumped. Alan's voice comes back in to tell us that dark matter and dark energy constitute over 95% of our universe, and that we're just a speck of light floating in an endless ocean of darkness. Oh, if I look like I'm crying, it's because I just had a coughing fit. Alex Casey is standing next to another character, Saga Anderson, who in this video is portrayed by an unnamed actress. Hey, it's Matt from the future, and I found out earlier today that that actress actually is credited. Not credited as Saga Anderson, but credited as appearing in that game, Quantum Break, for that segment there. Her name is Mala Malmavara. I think I'm saying that correctly. It's a Finnish name. She's a singer and actress who is pretty accomplished, has done a lot of work over the past, X number of years. So just wanted to put that info in here so I didn't, forget to give credit where credit is due. But since then, the role of Saga Anderson has been filled by British actress Melanie Liburd, who you might know from shows like This Is Us or Power Book 2 Ghost. Now, I want to take a detour here and discuss Saga Anderson for a moment, because I've seen way too many race-baiting comments online in reference to Remedy's choice to cast Melanie Liburd in this role. There are some people out there claiming to be upset over a character who was formerly portrayed by a white actress now being portrayed by a black actress. I don't really care to entertain claims of some sort of woke agenda, but I've seen this come up so often that I feel the need to address it if we're going to be discussing this particular video. And this video that we're discussing was just meant to give fans a glimpse of what Alan Wake 2 could look like, and to illustrate some of the story elements and concepts that Remedy was hoping to eventually explore. This video was made 8 years ago, and it's basically live action concept art. Now, I've seen some people online claim that Remedy would have never taken a formerly black character and, turned them into a white character. But if you look at the concept art for Langston from Control, we can see that Langston is not white in this concept art. And the reason for that is because when you're in the concept phase, you don't know who the actors are going to be that will eventually portray these characters. And that's why you'll see the race or gender of certain characters change when moving from the concept phase to the casting phase. Now, like I said, sometimes casting a character will mean that the gender, race, or sometimes even general age of that character is going to change. But beyond that, Remedy recast every major actor in the Max Payne series after the first game. And they released a bunch of early Quantum Break footage showing different actors portraying Jack Joyce. Casting and recasting is just something that happens, and to attach a bunch of racially motivated paranoia to it is just stupid. And I know that in spite of all of that, some people out there are going to continue to be race-baiting goons who will just believe whatever they want to believe. But if you are someone who is genuinely and innocently curious about why the race, gender, or general appearance of a character might change over the course of 8 years, just remember, going from concept to casting, things are going to change, and this particular video was never intended to be anything official, and all that's happened now is, since Alan Wake 2 actually went into production, they found who they wanted to portray the character of Saga Anderson, and it happens to be Melanie Liburd. And while we're on the topic of Saga Anderson, I've also seen a lot of general complaints about adding a second protagonist into Alan Wake 2. This concept video should have been a hint that Saga Anderson was going to play a pivotal role in the story of Alan Wake 2. But beside that, Remedy has been experimenting with multiple protagonists in their games ever since they first let players take on the role of Mona Sachs, all the way back in 2003's Max Payne 2. Quantum Break originally had 4 playable characters, but that idea was scaled back due to resource limitations. An early version of the first Alan Wake game had players switching between Alan and FBI agent Robert Nightingale, who would have been accompanied by his partner, Finnegan. The 2 FBI agents would have been searching for Alan Wake. While the idea of 2 FBI agents searching for Alan Wake didn't make it into the first game, it's clearly been reinterpreted for Alan Wake 2, except instead of just looking for Alan, we have the agents also looking into the supposed death of Robert Nightingale. This theme appears to be present in the concept video as well, and documents from their investigation are laid out on this bulletin board. This scene contains a lot of information, and while it's obvious that Alan Wake 2 has gone through a lot of changes and iterations since this video was made, I still think we can glean some helpful info from it, and beyond that, I think it's just fun to look at how much Remedy was able to cram into this 2-minute video. One of the first things I want to mention is the Ram statue. This is an item found in Quantum Break, and it has a pretty interesting story surrounding it. If you played Control, you're probably familiar with the concept of altered items.
We find them in the aftermath of altered world events. They take the form of everyday objects, ever present in our lives, constantly evoked in the thoughts of millions of people, now infused with unpredictable energies. They're altered.
Well, it's my opinion that the Ram statue is likely an altered item. While the Federal Bureau of Control was first introduced to players through the game Control, the idea of a shadowy arm of the FBI that investigates the supernatural was seemingly on the table for Remedy for a very long time, possibly even going back to the development of the first Alan Wake game. It's mentioned in the art and making of Control that Sam Lake started kicking the idea around in 2010 as a possible element to incorporate into a sequel to Alan Wake. This same anecdote is mentioned in the making of book for Quantum Break, which is titled The Secret History of Time Travel. After a while, it became clear to the team at Remedy that this story would be better served as its own separate IP, which eventually became Control. However, when it comes to Remedy, none of their games are really all that separate from one another, and while the idea of the FBC as we know it didn't really start to take shape until production was wrapping on Quantum Break, references to the Bureau and the general themes found in Control could be found all over the place way prior to the game actually having been released. Before production started on Control, the FBC was originally called the Bureau of Altered World Events, and the letters AWE can be seen tagged in graffiti on walls all throughout Quantum Break. There's also a memo found in Quantum Break that mentions the Bureau of Altered World Events, and another memo that mentions the Ram statue. In the story of Quantum Break, there are things called quantum ripples, which are basically like the butterfly effect. One action or event will set off a chain of seemingly unrelated actions or events. In the game, there's a powerful organization called Monarch Solutions, and you can find internal memos from Monarch tracking and discussing these ripples. Monarch was able to prove that the Ram statue somehow caused a ripple that led to the death of 2 Monarch employees, and ended with a sudden spike in the dairy product commodities market. While the exact details of how the statue caused the ripple aren't ever explained, Monarch is positive that the statue was the culprit, and that statue appears in this scene, as well as a few other places throughout the extended Remedy universe. While the altered item status of the Ram statue isn't confirmed, it definitely fits the archetype, and there's a few other references to the Bureau on this bulletin board. We can see a piece of paper that says AWE and a silhouette with the name Kirkland written beneath it. This is a reference to the former head of investigations at the Bureau, William Kirkland, who resigned in 2019, shortly before the events of Control. We learned in the AWE expansion for Control that FBI agent Alex Casey had been in touch with the FBC, requesting copies of their files on Bright Falls and the disappearance of Alan Wake. But we also learned that the FBC redacted much of the information found in those files. We also see that the Ram statue wound up in an evidence box at some point, which makes me wonder if the statue had been confiscated by the FBC and sent to Casey for his investigation. Unfortunately, there's no way of telling if the Casey in this particular video had already been in touch with the FBC or not, but we can definitely see that they are at least somewhat aware of the Bureau, and they know they're missing a few pieces of the puzzle. The fact that Kirkland is a person of interest in this case, and that he appears in the Alan Wake comics, makes me think it's likely he might have a bigger role in Alan Wake 2, and would somehow bridge the stories between Control and Alan Wake 2 just a little bit more. The other people on the board are Alan Wake, Alice Wake, Dr. Emil Hartman, Barry Wheeler, Robert Nightingale, and there's a second silhouetted figure, Mr. Scratch. While it may seem like Mr. Scratch was defeated at the end of Alan Wake's American Nightmare, the final lines of that game leave his fate open-ended, and references to Scratch in Control and the most recent Alan Wake 2 trailer lead me to believe that he'll definitely be appearing in the next game. Continuing with the bulletin board, there's the familiar map of the region surrounding Bright Falls, a torch which is very similar to the logo for Bright Falls Light and Power, and a photo that appears to be a cup of coffee. There's also a few landscape photos that were taken around Bright Falls. I want to thank everyone on Twitter, Reddit, and the Gaming University and Remedy Discord channels for chiming in and helping to decipher what some of these photos are. There's a really dedicated fan base for Remedy stuff in general, and I'm happy to find other people who are as obsessed with these little details as I am. Now, we're more certain about some of these than others, but based on the responses I collected, the consensus is that we've got Bright Falls Light and Power, the Bird Leg Cabin, Cauldron Lake, the Anderson Farm, the Rain Cove Point Lighthouse, and the sundial from the back of Cauldron Lake Lodge. Over here is what I think is a modified version of the Alan Wake silhouette logo, only he's holding what I think is a golf club, and if I'm right about that, I think it was just some sort of inside joke at Remedy. There's also a handful of phrases written on pieces of paper attached to the bulletin board, and most of them are pretty difficult to make out, but I was able to get a few. Starting at the top left, we have Flood of Darkness, a phrase that was uttered in the Alan Wake 2 trailer just before a large cultist burst through this wall.
Flood of darkness.
Below that, we have the phrase Dark Place, which is next to a photo that I've had a lot of trouble making out. I think it says the corridor, and it looks like the corridor that appears at various points in this video. If I were to take a wild guess, I would put forward the idea that this corridor is a threshold, like the thresholds found in Control. It's a way to get from our reality to another dimension. This corridor could be how Mr. Scratch travels freely between reality and the Dark Place, which he's able to do according to Alan Wake's American Nightmare. A similar sort of corridor can be seen in the final cutscene of the AWE expansion for Control, and Gaming University pointed out to me that there is a very similar scene found in the book House of Leaves, which has been cited many times as a major inspiration for Remedy. I could be way off with all that stuff, but for now it's a theory that I really like. Moving on either side of Alan's portrait, we have Missing and 5 Years. And down below that, there is a barely legible piece of paper that reads Ordinary Maine, which is where Control's protagonist, Jesse Faden, is originally from. Now, if you remember Ordinary being in Wisconsin instead of Maine, you're not crazy. When Control first launched, there were documents that said Ordinary was a town in Wisconsin, but I think that may have been a continuity error, because after the launch of AWE, it was switched to say Ordinary was a town in the state of Maine, which brings that information more in line with the references to Ordinary Maine found in Quantum Break. According to a Monarch document, there was a quantum ripple that caused a power outage in Ordinary, which then led to a spike in violent crime. Over on the far right side of the board is the term reality hacks, which sounds like a reference to the Dark Place and the ability that it has to affect reality. Lastly, there's a piece of paper that reads Islands of Crazy, Mass Psychosis, Chemicals in the water? It's hard to say what this is referring to. Maybe a possible AWE? Maybe it's a reference to the Cult of the Tree? It could, in part, be a reference to the waters of Cauldron Lake. In Alan Wake, we found out that the Anderson brothers would make moonshine using the Cauldron Lake water, and as we saw in the game, drinking the moonshine had a curious effect on Alan and Barry. There are some islands around Bright Falls and Watery, and if there were a flood of darkness, maybe it's possible that the waters of Cauldron Lake seeped under and infected the surrounding waters? I don't know, I'm just throwing stuff out there right now. It's really impossible to say, but it'll be interesting to see if this Islands of Crazy concept makes its way into Alan Wake 2. There are a few more papers on the board that are difficult to identify, but I'm positive that some of them are poems by Thomas Zane. We're about to get into some more fringe Remedy lore, but back in 2012, there was an ARG blog called This House of Dreams, which was written from the perspective of a woman named Samantha Waters, who bought a house in a town called Ordinary, presumably Ordinary, Maine. In the house, she found a shoebox full of photos and poems that appeared to belong to Thomas Zane. These items were confiscated by the FBC, but since this was back in 2012, they were still called the Federal Bureau of Altered World Events. However, this event is referenced and expanded on in Control, which is a whole other huge thing that we could make an entire video on, but let me continue. The blog features pictures of some of these poems, and it's pretty clear to me that this piece of paper right here is this poem, and that in this scene, Saga Anderson is holding several more of the poems. I believe that a few more of these poems made their way onto this board, and I also think I see some newspaper clippings, but unfortunately the images are way too small for me to make out any of the details. I was really hoping to just wring out every bit of information I could from this board, and so I ran a few stills from this video through AI upscaling to see if I could get any more detail, but unfortunately, AI still doesn't really handle text very well, so it was kind of a mess. However, if you have a keener eye than I, please leave a comment and tell me if you can make out any of these other things that I missed in terms of the words and letters and phrases written on the board. In the following scenes, we can see Alex Casey using the clicker, which is a crucial item from the first Alan Wake game, and it makes me wonder how he came into possession of it. We see the FBI agents in the woods appearing to discover the corpse of Alan Wake. We then see Alan Wake, or more likely, Mr. Scratch, in a corridor, where he encounters and then murders Alex Casey. Now, with Mr. Scratch being an Alan Wake doppelganger, it's sometimes unclear who is who, but we know for sure that Mr. Scratch appears in this video because in the credits, Ilka Villi is credited as playing both Alan Wake and Mr. Scratch. Saga Anderson adds Casey's photo to this bulletin board, and I think it's interesting to note here that Casey is wearing a Max Payne outfit, rather than the suit and tie that he had on earlier in the video. As she puts this photo up, I'm fairly positive we can see the word monomyth, which is a concept that is at the core of Alan Wake. I've discussed this in more depth in some other videos, but basically it refers to a cycle found in storytelling, and that cycle is departure, initiation, and return. Departure was the name of the manuscript that Alan was writing in the first game, and at the end of the second DLC episode, he started writing a new manuscript titled Return. However, he has yet to actually return, and it's my belief that in order to return, he must first complete the initiation phase of the cycle. Now, there's a lot of different theories out there about the initiation phase. Maybe initiation was American Nightmare, or maybe initiation happened during the events of Control and AWE. I don't think we know for sure yet, but I do expect that to be cleared up when we eventually play Alan Wake 2. Anyway, there are a few other scattered items in this room, like a telephone, which has come to be a very important piece of technology in Remedy games. There's a portrait of an unknown man in a suit and tie, which for me stirred up images of these sort of portraits we found in Control. There are a few birds, including an owl and some crows, and a lantern, similar to the one that Cynthia Weaver used in Alan Wake. Now, like I said, there's still a few pieces of paper on that bulletin board that I just couldn't make out, so again, if you got any input on that, leave a comment, let's talk about it. As Saga exits the room, Alan enters the room, and he begins perusing the evidence. He finds a set of manuscript pages and begins reading them to himself, discovering that he, or his doppelganger, killed Alex Casey. We then get a few more scenes showing the death of Casey and the inevitable encounter between Saga Anderson and Alan Wake, or Mr. Scratch. To close things out, Alan states that all of us have two faces, the one we wear for all to see, and the face that lies beneath in the dark. This is a clear reference to the relationship between Alan Wake and his doppelganger, Mr. Scratch, and that relationship between a person and their doppelganger is a theme that's been explored in one way or another in pretty much every Remedy game. If you want to know more about that, I'd suggest checking out some of our other Remedy-related videos, because for this video right here, that's pretty much all I've got. We still don't know much about Alan Wake 2, but we're about to find out a lot more, so I figured this would be a fun time to go back and revisit this video before we get hit with a flood of new Alan Wake 2 information. So what do you think? Did I miss anything super important from this concept video? And how much the concept do you think is actually going to show up in Alan Wake 2? And how cool is it that Remedy was able to put so much information in this little teaser trailer, and now we can kind of see how it's grown and changed since then, and also see how much of it is the same. Let's talk about it down in the comments, or hit up the Discord and talk to us there. There's a link for it in the description, and there's also a link to our Patreon. We have a Patreon and channel memberships if you're in a position to help the channel grow, and if you do that, well, we'd be greatly appreciative. If you're new here, we've got a huge backlog of videos for you to check out and enjoy, plenty of Remedy and Alan Wake and Control related stuff, but also a lot of other games as well. We do enjoy making these sort of research heavy deep dive videos, but we've got a lot of other lighter fare as well. So anyway, thanks for hanging out today. Until next time, see ya.